Alright, so in our basic tutorials, this will be the last one, and don't worry, the topics that I have missed, those are related to basically bit advanced topics, so I will cover all those things in our upcoming series where we are working on projects. So this in this lecture we are going to learn about API resources and how we can create APIs. Okay, so as normally we create the controllers in our controller section, but for the controllers creating API there is a different pattern. So what I'm going to do is basically, first of all, I am going to create an API controller, and then I will talk about API resources. So the first thing is basically PHP artisan make controller, and I'm going to say, okay, so this should be inside the API folder, and then I'm going to say it is a user controller, and then I'm going to give this a flag of API. Now by doing so, if I now go ahead into our directory, and inside the app HTTP, we now should see the API directory. Inside the API directory I have user controller. Now if I open that, and you will notice that we have a couple of methods already defined, starting from index. Now this index is basically used to show all our records. Then we have store. Now here you will see that we do not have a create function, because in APIs we are only dealing with sending data back in the form of JSON or any other format that we prefer. Okay, so now we are end up to we are having like these 5 methods inside the API controller. Now how we are actually going to fetch the data inside the API? So it's really simple, as normally we do. I'm going to return user, which contains all of the data. By doing so, now if I go to the browser, and now first of all let's basically create an API endpoint. Now inside the normally what we are doing in the web, we now have to define the API controllers or API routes inside the api.php file. So inside the routes directory, I'm going to open api.php. Obviously we have the middlewares as well in APIs, but obviously we will learn these things later in our project series. So I'm going to remove this one for now, and I'm going to say route, and I will say API resource. So we have a resource in web and we have an API resource in route. Okay, so I'm going to name this as users, and then this will be pointing to our user controller. So make sure that the controller that is inside the API directory, that is basically the folder. Okay, so now if I take a look at here, and now let's open our browser. Now in order to fetch the data, I need to use the prefix of API and then the users. Now by doing so, I should be able to get all of the users. Here I am getting all the users as a JSON format. Now there is one thing which is basically, let's talk about resources. Now what are resources? So resource is a way where you can transform your data before sending it back to the user. Alright, so for instance, let's say you don't want to send the email verified at or any other columns that you want to ignore. So the first method is basically you can basically use the hidden variables here. So if I now type in any column name here inside the hidden attributes, so if I now reload one more time, I should not be able to see those columns. Okay, that's the one way. But what is the use of resources? Now resources are really important and useful when we are dealing with multiple operations. For example, we want to show a relationships as well of a resource of a user, for instance, and we also want to make it also in a resource way that the selected value should be displayed to the user. So there are a lot of other options or other benefits of using resources, and I would suggest you to please explore the documentation as well. So let's create a resource first. So I'm going to say PHP artisan make resource, and I'm going to say user resource. Now if I now what I need to do is basically I need to, let's open the user resource first of all and see what we have here. So I'm going to say user resource. So that will obviously in the HTTP resources folder, and now this actually returns the data in the form of array. Now this array is then we can convert it into a JSON format as well. Obviously we send the data in the form of JSON when dealing with APIs. So in order to interact with collections by using in the user resource, so what we need to do is basically we need to say user resource and then collection. Inside the collection, I'm going to pass this users object or users collection. Now inside this user collection, I am going to return an array, and that array will say, okay, so I want to return the ID. So this will be the $this ID. Then I want to return the name as well. So $this name. And finally, I want to return the email of the user. So $this email. Now I have applied the resource to this function. If I now reload the page, you now see this is basically the exact format of when we are sending the data back to the APIs. So we now have automatically data here, and inside the data we have email, we have whatever the parameters we like to pass, and all the way down we will see the data in the form of basically the JSON. So that's how you actually use the resources. And the other way is you want to basically apply a resource on this user collection. So for an instance, where we have let me go to the database here. So we have users and we have user carriers here as well. So where we have user ID and then we have user NI as well. So what we can do is basically we can also chain the user collection, or sorry, the user relationship as well, and we can also pass that to the collection as well. So for an instance, let's say I have a user all, so I'm going to say users, and instead of all I'm going to say with, and with I'm going to say do we have a posts with users associated? Let me just check it out. No. So what we are going to do is basically we have basically, if I remember, yes, we have carriers here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to say with carriers and get all. Okay, now here I have now passed basically relation as well to this resource. But if I still go and reload this page, you will still see that I do not get any relationship data here. So in order to get that, or in order to perform or transform the data of resource collection, what I can do is basically I can say we have carriers, and this carrier, this will basically return the carriers relationship. Okay, and we can also apply the resource to this as well. So before that, if I reload the page, you can see that I am now getting a carriers, but obviously those carriers are empty. But if I go down, maybe we should have any carriers related to the user. So let's search for the user specific ID, which is 25, and let's search for 25. Maybe we get that all the way up top. Okay, so here you can see we now have carriers as well. But now in order to perform the resource on that, so what I want is basically I want to only return the title and some additional information. I don't want to return the pivot here. I don't want to return created ad or updated ad. So what I can do is basically I can create another resource. So I'm going to name it as user carrier resource. And once this is created, so since the carriers are collection, so what I can do is basically I can point user carrier resource and then collection, and inside the collection I'm going to pass this carriers, and now I need to transform the data inside this resource. So what I can do is basically I can return the array and I want the ID, then I want, so what we have title. So let's assume that I want the ID and title. Obviously we can manipulate it as we want, but for now, as for an example, so I want to return this. So now you can see that the carrier is now only returning the ID and the title. So that's how we can apply the resources to our collections and transform the data before sending it back to the API call. And that's really important, and this is really a powerful feature of the Laravel. And if you are dealing with APIs, if you are creating APIs, resources is necessary and resources are important to transform the data before sending it back to the API. That's about it, and I will see you in the next one.